While folks are logging in, I just want to confirm if you can see the reference documents posted in chat now. Ben?
I can't see anything in chat right now.
Oh, weird. Okay. Hmm. Well, I think that Matthew will just have to share it with everybody.
There it goes.
Yeah, you see it?
Yeah.
Excellent. And I'll upload the other items as well, the agenda and the 2022 reference document as well. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 SB1 Programs Advancing Equity, Transportation Equity Workshop. If that is what you were planning to join, then you are in the right place. I see that folks are still coming online, so I'm going to give it another couple of minutes before we go ahead and get started. As the rate of people is slowing down, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So again, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 2024 SB1 Programs Advancing Transportation Equity Workshop. As a reminder, anytime we state we or us during this workshop, we are referring to Commission staff. Ben, can we move on to the next slide, please? I am Naveen Habib. I manage the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, and I am joined today by Matthew Yozgat, Deputy Director of SB1 Programming, to cover today's workshop. We also have additional members of our team joining us today to help moderate this workshop. This includes Benjamin Williams and Celeste Almanza. In these workshops, we plan to review and amend program guidelines to prepare for the next program cycle, which is cycle 4. These guidelines govern how the program will be implemented, facilitated, and reported on, as well as how funds will be distributed to reimburse agencies for expenditures. All proposed changes to the guidelines will be shared and discussed during these workshops. And with that, let's move on to some housekeeping items. Next slide, please. Thank you. These workshops are intended to be an active discussion, not a lecture. This is exactly why participants are strongly encouraged to use the interactive features to share their thoughts at any time during the workshop. If you plan to make a comment or ask a question, please clearly state your name and your organization's name first, and then make your comment. You may raise your hand or add a comment at any point during our presentation, and we will ensure all comments are addressed as received. If you have multiple questions, please share them one at a time so that we may address each question in its entirety. And also not forget all of the questions you asked. And finally, as a reminder, your workshop registration link and phone number are unique to you. Please do not share this information with other participants as it duplicates the same attendee and creates confusion for commission staff. I'll pause here and see if there are any questions about the information I just covered. Just basic housekeeping stuff. Seeing none, I'm going to move ahead to the next slide, please. Workshop agendas are posted up to 10 calendar days in advance of each workshop. Presentations and recordings are posted after each workshop on the Commission's workshops webpage and the program webpage. We will make recommendations based on the consensus reached throughout roughly 2 workshops. For timeliness, additional time on any topic may be limited to ensure all scheduled topics are covered during the allotted time for any given workshop. Similarly, previously covered topics may not be readdressed at subsequent workshops unless determined necessary. Next slide, please. As you can see, these are the topics we plan to cover during today's workshop. And I have also, if you open chat, I have also shared the meeting agenda and the 2 reference documents. The first reference document is the 2022 competitive equity supplement from last cycle, and then the reference 2024 draft SB1 programs equity supplement that these are the proposed updates that we're going to be running through today. So you should see those all in chat. If you can't, let us know. We'll send them off to you separately as well. And just please note all of the materials we're sharing with you today will be posted and available on the Commission's website and all the program web pages after this workshop concludes. I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions at this time. Seeing none. Okay, I will now invite the Commission's Deputy Executive Director, Paul Golozowski, to make opening remarks and kick off today's workshop. Paul?
Hey, Naveen. I'm having trouble starting my video. I don't know. I must assist with that. Can you see me, Naveen? Again? Okay, great. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Golozowski. I'm the Chief Deputy Director at the Commission. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for the SB1 Programs Workshop, which is going to focus on advancing equity and transportation. We're eager to continue working with you all to update our guidelines where we set priorities for projects that will advance equity, combat climate change, improve safety, and grow our state's economy. As we all know, past improvements to the state's transportation system have disproportionately burdened disadvantaged and historically impacted and marginalized groups, which is why investing in a more equitable transportation system will benefit all Californians, especially our most vulnerable residents. To achieve this goal, the Commission adopted its racial equity statement in January 2021, where we vowed to improve the quality of life for all Californians by prioritizing transportation equity and ensuring that everyone may benefit from a safe, affordable, and efficient transportation system. At the Commission, our actions speak louder than our words, which is why we worked with you, our stakeholders and partners, to assemble an equity advisory roundtable, which has since evolved into an interagency equity advisory committee to help us implement the racial equity statement. Since 2021, roundtable members and now equity advisory committee members have supported the development of program guidelines in several of the Commission's programs, including the SB1 programs. Last program cycle, our conversations and ongoing dialogue with our stakeholders spurred the development of the SB1 Competitive Programs Transportation Equity Supplement, as well as the elevation of community engagement to a formal evaluated criteria and program guidelines. Equity Advisory Committee members contributed their expertise and guided Commission staff to develop the equity supplement and appropriate criteria to identify mechanisms which would improve equitable outcomes through project development, nomination, and the selection process. Thereafter, several Equity Advisory Committee members reviewed and evaluated the community engagement section of the Cycle 3 program applications which ultimately determine the overall competitiveness of each project and development of the final staff recommendations. Since then, Equity Advisory Committee discussions with Commission staff have focused on developing strategies and supporting documents that represent best practices in public engagement. These are significant accomplishments in alignment with our racial equity statement to support meaningful public participation in the decision-making process and to increase equitable outcomes. Our collective mission is to catalyze the process of improving engagement with residents, community-based organizations, and tribal governments. With 3 grant cycles behind us, the Commission's SB1 program implementation now enters its 4th cycle where, with your help, we plan to advance our progress toward implementing equitable practices even further. The Commission is committed to actively working to promote equitable outcomes and intends to use these guidelines to help ensure equity and robust public engagement. It's essential that we work together towards these goals to shape the future of transportation in our state. Transportation is a vital part of our daily lives, but access to an affordable, safe, and reliable transportation network can transform lives. So thanks again, everyone, for your partnership and participation today, and we look forward to a robust discussion, and I'll turn it back to Naveen.
Thank you so much, Paul. We'll move on to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. Before we go along to the workshop itself, I do want to share a quick refresher about the SB1 programs for those of you who may not be as familiar with SB1 programs. So on April 28th, 2017, after years of advocating for a solution to the state's transportation crisis, then Governor Brown signed the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, commonly known as SB1. This landmark transportation funding package established fuel taxes and vehicle fees, which will generate new funding for roadways, including up to $1.5 billion per year, allocated directly to counties and cities for local road maintenance, safety improvements, and complete street improvements, including facilities for bicycles and pedestrians. SB1 increased transportation funding, instituted necessary reforms, and provided the first significant, stable, and ongoing increase in state transportation funding in over 2 decades. SB1 also expanded the Commission's role by creating new programs under its purview, which included the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, and Local Partnership Program. The Commission sets policies and program guidelines for all SB1 programs, which are developed through a rigorous public guidelines development process. The reason why we're gathered here today, essentially. So once adopted, these program guidelines set the policies, standards, and procedures for the development, adoption, and management of each SB1 program, including criteria for evaluating and selecting projects and accountability requirements related to project delivery, such as scope, schedule, and cost. The next 3 slides provide a high-level overview of each program, with embedded links to each program's webpage on the Commission's website. If you are not familiar with the programs, I strongly encourage you to review this information and contact the respective program staff with any questions. Briefly, if we can move on to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. I'll cover each of the program items briefly, but if you want details, again, refer to the program webpage and feel free to contact the respective staff with any questions. So this is the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, which I manage. It's also known as SCCP. This is a competitive program that provides funding to regional transportation planning agencies, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans to achieve transportation, environmental, and community access improvements to reduce congestion throughout the state. Next slide. The Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, also known as TCEP, is a competitive program that provides funding to freight projects nominated by local agencies and the state. Funding is based on 50% of the estimated annual revenues generated by the diesel fuel excise tax imposed by state statute and on the federal obligation authority limits that are part of the National Highway Freight Program. This program is currently coordinated by Kayla Giese and Kenneth Lopez, and if you have questions about it, feel free to reach out to them. Next slide, please. The Local Partnership Program, also known as LPP, provides funding to counties, cities, districts, and regional transportation agencies in which voters have approved fees or taxes dedicated solely to transportation improvements, or that have imposed fees, including uniform developer fees, dedicated solely to transportation improvements. The Local Partnership Program funds are distributed through a 40% statewide competitive component and a 60% formulaic component. This program is currently managed by Lashara Ward, and Ben Williams, who is advancing our slides very kindly, is an analyst in this program. If you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to them. Next slide. In addition to this standalone equity-focused workshop, the Commission's SB1 programs are currently hosting individual monthly program guidelines development workshops for each program, as well as virtual office hour sessions where applicants across the state may request to meet with us one-on-one to discuss their project proposals. But I will cover more on that later today. During the kickoff workshop in December 2023, we established that funding cycle 4 will be a 2-year program. I'm so sorry. The cycle 4 will be a 2-year program spanning fiscal years 2025-26 and 2026-27. In addition to clarifying edits reinforcing program requirements, there will be greater consideration on workforce development, and we will continue to advance equity in our program guidelines to consider equity throughout the project development, nomination, and selection process. Next slide. This is the proposed timeline for all SB1 programs in cycle 4. As you can see, we are currently in the workshops phase, which was winter to spring 2024 for all SB1 program workshops. In spring 2024, we commenced our SB1 office hours sessions. And in summer 2024, we anticipate guidelines adoptions and calls for project. In fall and winter of 2024, we will require all SB1 project nominations will be due to us. And then summer 2025 is when we anticipate SB1 program adoptions for cycle 4. But I do want to say there's a little caveat on the slide, and I'll explain that this timeline is tentative and may be subject to change. If there are any changes, we will notify you as soon as possible through email and on the Commission's website. Next slide, please. As Paul mentioned earlier, to further the implementation of the Commission's racial equity statement within each of the SB1 competitive programs, Commission staff in collaboration with our Equity Advisory Roundtable and stakeholders developed the SB1 Competitive Program Transportation Equity Supplement, also referred to as the Equity Supplement for short. This supplement provided important information on indicators that could be used to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups, equity benefits, community engagement strategies, and anti-displacement resources, which were all intended to guide applicants to provide more detailed information about the project's benefits and impacts to disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. In addition, community engagement was elevated as an evaluated criterion to provide a mechanism to ensure that the project selection process results in projects that provide more equitable outcomes to disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. What you see on your screen are excerpts from the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors program guidelines. I've shared those here as an example. The excerpt on the left is the community engagement criterion, which required applicants to demonstrate 1, how they engaged project area communities to identify their needs, 2, how they incorporated that feedback into the project, and 3, how they developed the project scope through collaboration with disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. The excerpt on the right is from the Equity Supplement, which was added as Appendix E in the program guidelines. This equity supplement from 2022 was shared as a linked reference document in the workshop agenda, as well as in the chat earlier, as I explained earlier to all of you. I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions or comments before I advance to the next slide. Okay, seeing none, I think we can move on to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. During the project evaluation process, members of our Interagency Equity Advisory Committee evaluated each transportation project with respect to that project's response to the community engagement criterion. Members directly contributed to the Commission's project evaluations, which ultimately determined which projects were awarded a portion of over $1.7 billion available in the third funding cycle. Advancing equity in transportation is an evolving process. The Commission endeavors to ensure program policies progress by embedding equity considerations in the project development, nomination, and selection process, including the community engagement criterion and equity supplement in cycle 3, ensured that projects with more equitable outcomes were competitive for funding awards. In cycle 4, we are continuing to engage and collaborate with the Interagency Equity Advisory Committee and our stakeholders to further update the community engagement criteria and the equity supplement for all SB1 programs. Next slide, please. To this end, I want to remind you all that this process relies heavily on the discussions and feedback we engage in with you, our partners and stakeholders. In the last cycle, we had the privilege of engaging in discussions with several of you during workshops, office hours, and debrief sessions where you shared your thoughts on how we may improve the next program cycle, which is here now in cycle 4. So common among some of these suggestions were the suggestion to reduce redundancy in criteria response requirements. You felt that the questions were too similar, which resulted in duplicative, run-on, or broad responses. You sought greater clarity about how to engage communities effectively, where to start, or how to continue. So we have sought advice from advocates to determine more specific and proven strategies for you to reference or apply in your project development process. And finally, you asked that we try to limit major overhauls or changes to the program guidelines to alternate cycles. This would allow agencies to adjust to the changes and help set a baseline to measure progress with new requirements. These are all great suggestions. In today's workshop, I will introduce some draft proposed updates based on your feedback. We hope you will continue to engage with us through the course of this and the remaining workshops by sharing your insightful feedback. We will do our best to accommodate your suggestions. Before I move on from this slide, I do want to open this section up for a larger discussion. Anyone want to share their experience responding to the community engagement criteria and using the equity supplement from cycle 3, or want to share any additional feedback? Now's the time. And I also have a poll that I put together that I'm going to launch. If you don't feel like you want to comment, feel free to respond in the poll. You are a quiet bunch. There are 55 of you. I'm sure somebody somewhere has a comment or experience to share. All right, well, you'll have more opportunities to comment, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. Thank you, Ben. Okay. So here you can see the proposed updates to the equity supplement in the 2024 SB1 program guidelines. I would like to remind you that these are draft red line edits and may be subject to changes based on additional review and feedback, including what we hear from you all today. Please remember this presentation and all corresponding materials will be posted online after the workshop, and most of the proposed changes you see here are minor edits meant to clarify intent based on feedback we received directly from you. I will also note that while you see a draft watermark on this first page right here, on the subsequent slides that followed, the draft watermark was removed. That was for readability and accessibility purposes. That does not mean that those changes are finalized. They are still draft. I just removed the watermark to make it easier to read across the presentation. And we've also shared the 2024 draft changes with you in chat, so you can open that document up and follow along if that is more convenient and easier for you. Okay, so we're kicking things off by amending the supplement title and removing the word competitive here. The equity supplement will now apply to all SB1 programs, including the local partnership formulaic program. We are excited about this update since we started this effort by focusing on our competitive programs and now seek to advance equity in our formulaic programs as well. Many of you have shared with us the work you are already doing, and this provides you an opportunity to formally highlight how you are incorporating equitable practices in your eligible formulaic program projects. I think we can move on to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. Here you can see the proposed revisions to the supplement's introduction and intent. The red line edits may seem plentiful here, but they are mostly cleanup edits to reduce redundancies. We have made some clarifying edits here as well, hoping to further refine our intentions with the equity supplement. At the top, you will see we reinforce our vision to ensure program policies progress by embedding equity considerations in the project development, nomination, and selection process. We have also added additional groups to consider and engage as part of the disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups, such as displaced or unhoused persons and individuals living with disabilities. Towards the bottom of this page, we have reiterated our intent to consider equitable practices through a project's life cycle, which includes the planning, development, and delivery processes. To this end, we have suggested utilizing structural and procedural equity strategies like the ones we have provided within the supplement. Structural strategies reform planning practices to create inclusive, affordable, and resource-efficient transportation infrastructure, whereas procedural strategies provide special benefits to disadvantaged groups to create fairness in the process itself. And finally, we have clarified that agencies may use the equity supplement, to incorporate equitable corridor improvement strategies and advance projects with more equitable outcomes in their comprehensive multimodal corridor plans, also known as CMCPs, as required in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions or feedback, as I've shared a lot of information. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes and just wait to see if anybody has any questions or comments or general feedback to share. I see a couple of hands. I'm going to go ahead and allow Hannah to talk. Hannah, I'm sorry, not Hannah, Hannah, to talk first. Give me just 1 second.
Hi, folks. Hannah Krieger with the Green Lining Institute. First of all, I just want to say this is super exciting. I can tell how much work has gone into this, and I'm thrilled that the intent is to apply this to formulaic programs in addition to competitive ones. And perhaps I missed this, or maybe I'm jumping the gun, but I'm curious to get a sense of like exactly how this supplement will be used to incentivize project applicants to embed these different procedural equity pieces within their applications. So for example, like, with the California Climate Investments Program, there is a target that the agencies are required to hit, right? And so knowing that there's an investment target, then that creates kind of a incentive for project applicants to try to ensure equity shows up really strongly in their application. So just wanted to get a sense of like, is the idea that this is kind of like a voluntary approach of project applicants, or is there kind of a bit more of like structure to incentivize how equity shows up? Thanks.
Thanks, Hannah, for that question. So I'm going to take it in part, and then hopefully Matthew can add to it if I miss anything. So with SB1, part of the limitation with the programs is that we have statutory requirements as part of our framework that we have to meet. They're just built into the legislation. So one of those things is not the separate, I guess, what you're saying, targets, that if that's the right word, I think that's what you said. We can't really specify specific targets because it would be somewhat not within the scope of the statutory requirements that we have and the framework that we have for the programs. However, because we elevated community engagement to an evaluation criteria in the last cycle, we're able to expand a little bit more and hopefully give applicants a broader reach to be able to shine in the community engagement space. We're hoping that with these additional changes and strategies that we've been suggesting within the equity supplement, we'll see more and more applicants engage their communities in more verifiable ways, if that makes sense. I'm going to pause here really quick because I know that there's something I'm missing here, and I'll wait for Matthew to maybe chime in a little bit. Is that all right?
Yeah, Naveen, I will chime in as well. And I'm sorry, I'm having the same issue that Paul is having, I think, trying to turn on my camera, although I'm not 100% feeling well today, so maybe it's best that my camera is not on. Naveen covered it pretty well. I would say, in the competitive programs, so Solutions, Trade Corridor, and Local Partnership Competitive, we do have multiple evaluation criteria, not just the community engagement criteria, that are now kind of expanding to allow applicants to demonstrate that they've really considered this supplement through the types of projects that they're bringing to us. Accessibility is one of those criteria where we would really hope that our applicants would lean on this supplement to strengthen the responses that they provide. Now, in the formula program, and I know the commission oversees several formula programs. The only formula program that we're really folding into this process right now is our local partnership formula program, because that's the only SB1 program under my discretion right now. And STIP and SHOP are two other formula programs that have, I would say, they're far more statutorily driven than a lot of the SB1 programs are. So right now, the only formula program that we're considering, folding the supplement in is LPP formula. And we won't be able to make any like requirements in the LPP formula program this cycle that our applicants are utilizing the supplement or responding to the the aspects of the supplement that can strengthen a project application from our perspective. However, we're hoping that it can evolve over the course of, as I know most of you have heard us say, each iteration of each program cycle. So kind of maybe introducing it to our LPP formula program now. That program has a specific list of eligible applicants. There are those that have voter approved measures or taxes or fees in place. And that maybe we could consider, strengthening, either requiring around it or seeing what type of feedback we get in LPP formula this upcoming cycle to know whether or not this tool is actually useful. In terms of having targets, though, I agree with what Naveen said. I don't think in the SB1 programs right now we're at a point where we can start recommending having benchmarks that have to be met within any of the programs. Now, obviously, that could certainly change in any of the programs if there is legislation that becomes signed statute that might require us to do so. But given the current guidance that we have, and we're really just considering that if your project kind of aligns to our equity supplement and demonstrates responses that really show that it's been considered, you'll be more competitive.
Thanks, Matthew. I think Hannah had a couple of follow-ups. So I'm just going to go ahead and read them out loud. Definitely understand that requirements can't be made for an investment target due to statutory requirements. But what about setting a non-binding investment goal? And then she followed up and said, lots of other agencies have set similar non-binding investments targets. So I think that's a good question. I know I can speak for SCCP a little bit more specifically, whereas maybe Matthew can speak a little bit more broadly about all SB1 programs. With SCCP, we only have $250 million that are available annually for us to spend on projects, and SCCP already has a fiercely, extremely competitive list of projects that compete each cycle. So given the limitation of the $250 million, and SCCP specifically has specific requirements in statute on how those funds can be distributed, that makes it a little bit hard to provide an investment goal. Although if it's non-binding, it's certainly an option we can explore broadly for all SB1 programs. I will pause here to see if Matthew has anything to add specifically for any of the other SB1 programs.
This is on the topic of non-binding investment targets.
Yeah.
I think it's tricky. The programs, the SB1 programs fund, each of them fund multimodal approaches. So we're not looking at just one type of a program that funds just rail another type of a program that funds just active transportation. Certainly, you know, we don't want to have a program that's simply funding on-system improvements. And I think within our programs, you'll notice that multimodal outcomes are actually projects that rise to the top. And so in my experience working with programs that have set-asides or investment targets, they're typically programs that fund like either a specific set of infrastructure or a specific mode. And it, you know, this topic has come up over the course of the last 3 cycles that we've been managing these programs, and we've considered things like having targets when it comes to the size of the jurisdiction. The local partnership program kind of flirted with the idea of having different targets that should be met for agencies that have, you know, above a certain population threshold down to the smallest population thresholds. And what ended up happening was we had these targets that weren't, at the end of the day, necessary, because we ended up funding a wide spectrum of projects in our first and second LPP competitive cycles. So I understand what you're saying, Hannah, and I might be interested to have you provide us with a couple of examples of what you might want us to consider. But I can say right now, we haven't really found a way to have it make sense that also would be kind of pleasing to a majority of our stakeholders. As you all know, we try not to impose changes in these programs that would go against the consensus of the group of stakeholders that are obviously going to be delivering these projects. And so I would say, you know, if we found a way that seems that could be acceptable, it's something we could consider. I don't think we've found one yet.
Thanks, Matthew. And I noticed, Hannah, thank you for clarifying your comment. I'm going to share it with everybody. Hannah, in terms of investment targets, she was specifically referring to investment targets for disadvantaged communities. I think both Matthew and I understood that reference, but in case anybody was concerned about broader investment targets or anything, I think she meant more specifically for disadvantaged communities in particular. So thank you for that question, Hannah. And we hope that we can continue to engage in a discussion with you and our other advocacy organizations and partners as we advance in more cycles with SB1 programs. I do want to go ahead and see, I know Abby had her hand up. So Abigail Jackson had asked, the edits mentioned structural and procedural equity strategies. Do you see these as 2 different terms, or give examples of what these would be, or just elaborate really, because I see the explanation is already there. So I want to expand because I think this is a good question, Abby, and I'm sure if you have it, then maybe at least 1 or more other people do as well. So by structural strategies, we mean you can reform planning practices, right? So these include multimodal planning, pricing reforms to internalize external costs, or developmental policy changes to increase different types of multimodal options in the neighborhoods where you're planning to develop a project. Whereas in terms of procedural strategies, these are more like programmatic changes that you can make. For example, establishing special mobility services for people living with disabilities, transit fare discounts for seniors and people with disabilities, or any such similar types of programs which sort of already exist. You see those for students, the fare reductions, that kind of hopefully answers your question. Let me know, feel free to follow up if I didn't cover it entirely, but I'm happy to offer more examples if you need them. And I will also express that this is not something new. This is something that we saw in cycle 3 and even in cycle 2 in some of the responses that applicants provided in their project applications. So that's why we were factoring it in, because some of you or all of you are doing some version of this work already. So I just wanted to bring kind of a light to it and include it within the equity supplement as well. And okay, so I'm going to see, I think Sona had a question, so I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk, Sona.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Sona Papayan from LA Metro. I have a question on the first bullet point for community engagement. So the question asks, how did the agency engage communities, and its follows up with whether it was a direct engagement. I want to understand whether there is a specific purpose of just putting emphasis on direct engagement, or maybe this can be this can include also other types of engagement, such as indirect or research-based engagement, which is basically engaging with the community through CBOs, and possibly maybe include what it means to have a direct engagement, what it means to have an indirect engagement, and etc. Thank you.
I guess I'm not entirely clear about why engaging through a CBO would be considered indirect engagement. Based on what you're describing, that would also be direct engagement, because obviously you went out there, contacted a community-based organization, and that's what a CBO is. My apologies if somebody missed that. Community-based organizations are typically referred to as CBOs. So if you are going out to contact a community-based organization and build a relationship with them to the point at where they're going out on your behalf to conduct surveys, or walk the different neighborhoods and like get information or get people to come join an event that you might be hosting, I would say that is direct engagement, not indirect. Indirect may almost be, I guess I would prefer to refer to it as maybe passive and active engagement, passive being more like you sent flyers out into the world and cross your fingers, hope that somebody shows up, versus active engagement, which is what you just described as an example. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, are you saying that you want more examples of passive versus active engagement, or trying to clarify the difference between the two?
Perhaps what you're looking for by saying direct engagement, because the literature differs. If you look, different types of documents have a different identification, what direct or indirect or even passive active engagement looks like. So if there is a more clarification in this document, what exactly CTC is looking for in terms of community engagement and how we need to interpret the language, that would be more helpful, at least for me. Maybe for others it's more clear.
No, absolutely, Sona. That's a valid comment and statement. I will say that based on the updates that I will move on to in a few minutes after we respond to the questions, you'll see that we've provided more strategies and examples of types of engagement or inclusion activities that you can engage in with a community. So hopefully that will in part offer some information. In terms of direct and indirect engagement, that's something I can definitely take back as feedback and consider a little bit more carefully in terms of how to explain that and expand upon that definition a little bit, just so we can be as clear as possible with our intention in the supplement. Thank you for your comment. Shelley, I see your hand up. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk so you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Naveen. This is Shelley Kwan, also from LA Metro. I'm wondering where in the application questions that are sort of bulleted here we could best discuss equitable practices like later in the project's life cycle, like during delivery. At Metro, we consider things like disadvantaged business hiring and small business hiring as part of our equity platform, which is obviously during the delivery stages of the project. So I'm wondering where we could best talk about this, as I also understand there might be additional workforce development language being added to the criteria this cycle.
That's a great question. Thank you, Shelley. So I will say that for SB1 programs broadly, we do cover most of the questions that you see listed here specifically that are that apply to the community engagement criteria, and all three of the program guidelines focuses on the planning, designing, more of the development, early development phase, and then up to construction and all the activity you conduct then. But we did notice that people are talking about the delivery process as well, and the items that you just mentioned, those would be good to highlight. And I did notice that in the cycle 3 applications we received, several of the project applicants were able to share, just as an appendix almost, their community engagement plans, which covered the entire life cycle of their engagement process throughout the entire life cycle of the project itself. So that did cover things that they're planning to do in the delivery phase and then the post-delivery phase as well, to continue engaging with those communities where they've established those trusted relationships. So that is something further to consider. I think that maybe we can explore adding that question into the guidelines themselves. So that does allow you to put the response in the actual narrative and for consideration as part of the evaluation criteria overall. And I'm going to pause here and see if Matthew has anything additional to add or any thoughts beyond what I've just shared.
No, Naveen, I think you covered it well. The only thing I would say, obviously this wouldn't be necessarily for projects that weren't successful in getting funded, but projects that are successful in being funded with SB1 funds, for those of you that don't follow along all the different changes we make to the various guidelines we do have a set of SB1 accountability and transparency guidelines that we updated back in 2023 that does require projects to start reporting on some of the kind of quality of life benefits that they're providing to their communities over the course of like 5 years after the project is completed. And so I think what you're describing, Shelley, would be exactly the type of update we would want to see. And I know Metro has several projects that have been successful in getting SB1 programming. So that would be a great opportunity to really explain some of that. And I think you also pointed to, if we are going to include updated language around workforce development this cycle, or even in a future cycle, that would be a really important place to talk about. I think some of the attributes you were covering in your comment.
And I think Shelley did have a follow-up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself so you can make your comment.
I don't know that I did. That's sort of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. That was a great question. Thank you for asking it. And I was able to put into chat, and I know some of you are having a little bit of a hard time seeing things in chat, so don't worry. I will send a follow-up email after this workshop to all of the attendees at this workshop with the documents that we shared with you today, including the workshop presentation, as well as the accountability and transparency guidelines, so you can go and reference them. And there's a lot of information on our website about it, but we're also available to respond to any questions that you may have about the accountability and transparency guidelines as well.
Naveen, I'll just say I have since realizing that folks were having difficulty accessing the chat. I've sent the 3 resource documents to the entire attendee list. So everybody should have it in their inbox. If they go check, you should have today's agenda, the currently adopted SB1 equity supplement, and then the draft changes to the 2024 SB1 transportation equity supplement as well.
Thanks, Matthew. Shelley, I still see your hand raised. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. Or no, or not. Okay, Shelley's hand is gone. Great. So it seems that a few of you who messaged that chat wasn't working. It's now working for you again, so that's awesome. Hopefully the added email just helps you retain the documents for a later time. I don't see any other questions or comments pertinent to this specific slide at this time. So I think we can go ahead and advance, but please note, we can always come back to any other slide that you want us to come back to at any time. We're just going to move ahead so we can make sure we cover all the material we intended to cover today. Okay, there is one more question from Hannah about the accountability and transparency guidelines. Let me just go ahead and answer that live. So Hannah asked, what are the transparency and accountability guidelines? I'm going to try to do it justice because this is something that came a little bit before I was here. So as part of Senate Bill 1, oh, Matthew, did you want to?
Naveen, I'm just going to say, I think she's asking, where are the transparency?
Oh, where are they? I'm so sorry. I read that wrong.
Well, Hannah, I will send you a link to those right now. But Naveen, please, for those who might not be aware, this is all alphabet soup. Why don't you go ahead and describe in your understanding what the accountability guidelines are.
So the accountability and transparency guidelines, essentially in Senate Bill 1, the statute, there's a very specific note about accountability and ensuring that we measure that accountability through performance goals that are then tracked and reported. So it's not just we're out here just, awarding projects and giving out money left and right. We're also making sure that once the project is awarded, and essentially programmed into the commission's program of projects for a specific funding program, we go ahead and track it through the remainder of its life cycle. So, for example, in a Solutions for Congested Corridors program, if you were to receive funds from SCCP and you're programmed and you come in for an allocation and we allocate those funds to you, from that point on, we measure where, not just from that point on, but specifically from that portion when we allocate funds to you, we measure how you're spending those funds. Are you expending them timely? Are you expending them making sure that they're expended with the program guidelines and their intent in mind, and that you're delivering all of the milestones timely, and that you are making sure to report and track all of this information on your end, because when a project completes, we do require a project completion report that includes the benefits and outcomes that were promised in the baseline agreement that you signed when your project was programmed, and amongst a host of other things. And obviously, I'm not doing it all the justice it requires, because we do have very expansive guidelines that are included on the Commission's website, and they were just recently updated in the last year. So we do encourage folks to go ahead and read those guidelines to familiarize themselves with the accountability requirements. But I will say that we do cover front-end accountability, things like making sure we have a completed baseline agreement for every single project that is programmed into any of our competitive programs or any of our non-competitive programs as well. We have baseline agreements for all of our projects. And then we have in-progress accountability. So that ongoing program monitoring and review that I mentioned, making sure that they're maintaining the approved schedule, scope, and cost and delivery. They're achieving those anticipated benefits. They're retaining financial records and that support all the expenditures they're making. And these accurate and timely progress reports are part of the annual reports that are published by the Commission, as well as the semi-annual reports that are published by Caltrans. So all of this information is publicly accessible online. I'm also happy to include all of the links in my follow-up email to this workshop as well. And yes, I just noticed that Michelle had a follow-up question saying, can that also be shared with everybody? Absolutely. I will include a link to that. All of this information that I've just shared about the accountability and transparency guidelines in the email that I sent to you to follow up with this workshop. And Hannah, I see you have a question.
Yeah, sorry that you're taking up so much space, but I'm very excited about
That's
all
what
these
we're here for.
developments. So I want to understand better. Thanks for pointing me towards those transparency and accountability guidelines. And I guess I'm curious, like, how this transportation equity supplement will also be kind of aligned with the transparency and accountability efforts. So for example, would the guidelines, updated guidelines require the public sharing of what percentage of awarded projects are delivering benefits to disadvantaged communities? I think this is just such a critical way for CTC to understand the baseline of where we're currently at in order to then advance all the equity goals set forward in your statement.
Yeah, that's a good question, Hannah. So the answer is a little bit what I will define as in progress, if that makes sense. So there are multiple efforts that are underway that I think maybe folks from our planning team will be able to articulate much better than I can. So I think there is an effort undergoing. There's all of the CAPTI framework requirements and strategies that we're factoring into all of our guidelines. And part of that was to develop a Caltrans system investment strategy that is otherwise known as CSIS, that's incorporating equity as part of that project evaluation and scoping process. And then we have the accountability and transparency guidelines that are like the back end of it, like once a project is programmed, to making sure that we're reaping the benefits of what we ask people to deliver, and we're tracking all of that information accurately on our end, like you were saying. So I think CSIS is a big part of that. And then we will I think as far as I remember, the most recent iteration of the accountability and transparency guidelines does include some of this information in there, but I don't think disadvantaged communities are specifically called out as a metric. We did factor in the updated performance metrics guidebook. But because a lot of these benefits that they claim in the project application and these outcomes are specifically memorialized in the baseline agreement, and if they say it's going to benefit a disadvantaged community, when we do those final tracking and delivery reports, we do ask the program team to provide information on whether or not those benefits were in fact delivered. And if they were not, then there is like repercussions to that and why they weren't able to deliver the full scope and the outcomes that they promised in the baseline agreement itself. So there is a pretty well-established process, and it is getting updated as the newer initiatives are being developed. So hopefully, just a polite way of summarizing all of that is that it's in progress. And hopefully that covers your question, Hannah. But if you have any follow-ups, let me know.
Yeah, Naveen, I'm going to just add a tiny bit more because I know this is something that is really important to our stakeholders, and I think kind of gets at ultimately what Hannah's asking about. And I know it's not just Hannah's organization. I know we're always asked about how are SB1 dollars impacting in a positive way disadvantaged communities, and how are they contributing towards projects that will benefit these marginalized parts of the state. So I would say currently, in terms of having access to that level of information, we're working very closely with Caltrans on strengthening the level of detail that's currently facing the public. And I think that the Rebuilding CA website is going to be the best initial spot to send our public for understanding where these projects are located, how many dollars, and what the projects are doing with a pinpoint map. I also understand we want to try to have additional level of detail to really answer that question, Hannah, about if we were to ask you how many funds from SB1 program, SCCP, and Cycle 2 are contributing directly to benefiting disadvantaged communities. We could give you a ballpark range, but I think it also gets down to the granularity of how many projects are being funded, how many of those projects are a suite of projects as opposed to just a single project, which means that they have multiple contracts associated with them. And so I know we've spoken with your team and others about this in the past. We are trying to get more, I think, deliberate in the amount of information we ask for from our applicants to really demonstrate a dollar value that's contributing and benefiting our disadvantaged communities. And you probably won't like this response because I think I've provided it in the past, but it gets tricky too, right? Because when we're talking about a program like the Active Transportation Program, I think it's very safe to assume if a $5 million ATP project is being constructed in a disadvantaged community, you can assume that $5 million is contributing towards the enhancement of that disadvantaged community. If you're talking about a project like a freight project, even if it's a double track of a freight rail line, you're not necessarily going to want to see that project go in a disadvantaged community. You might want to see it go outside of the range of a disadvantaged community to demonstrate that freight is alternately taking or is taking an alternate path to go around the disadvantaged community. But those are the types of nuances that I think we're still trying to work out how to reflect in a transparent way when we're dealing with programs that fund different types of projects that obviously have different types of impacts to not just disadvantaged communities, but any community, urban, rural, throughout the state. So it's a question I'm really happy that has been coming up and it's being talked about. And obviously, Caltrans is going to be a huge partner of ours in terms of being able to reflect out on the type of information we're gathering and collecting and able to share out. So just hoping to communicate that we know that there's room to grow, I should say, and we believe we're headed in that direction.
There is
Thanks,
one-
Naveen.
No, thanks, Matthew. There is one more question outstanding from Michelle. She is Michelle Rusi. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. What, if any, engagement is done before projects are approved? So that depends from project to project. That's really dependent on the applicant and the area in which they are choosing to develop or proposing a project. It just really depends on what kinds of strategies they're undertaking. This equity supplement provides a host of different strategies that they can utilize. Certainly, none of the applicants are limited to the information that we've provided herein. They can try any other strategies that they've worked on before or that they've partnered on with other agencies. There's not really any specific a specific answer that I can provide related to what the engagement is before any projects are approved. So just when we're reviewing all of the project applications, we do ask about it in the community engagement criteria within all of the program guidelines. And as applicants are responding to that criteria, they have different ways of engaging the communities and they share that with us. And based on their responses, they get a certain type of rating, either high, medium, low, or low, depending on the response that they shared with us. Hopefully that answers your question, Michelle.
Naveen, this is the luxury, but also the downside, I think, of having both of us be able to access these questions. I think I might be reading it a slightly different way. And I think the way you answered it is perfect. But the way I'm reading Michelle's question is, what do we do if a project hasn't done any engagement and it's being submitted, right? And I think that's a great question. If a project hasn't, so for one, it does seem highly unlikely that a project wouldn't have done any engagement if that project has started its environmental phase. So it's PA&ED phase of the project, simply because in order for a project to undergo and go through the environmental approval process, there has to be a level of engagement, public discourse allowed to provide an opportunity for the public to understand what a list of alternatives is and weigh in on what those may be. If we were to receive a project in an SB1 program, a competitive program that demonstrates that maybe they haven't done any level of community engagement outside of their environmental, or maybe they don't even characterize that, it should be safe to assume that project is going to perform very, very poorly on our community engagement evaluation criteria, which all of our SB1 competitive programs now require projects to demonstrate community engagement in order to be competitive in that criteria. So if that is the question that we're asked, what happens if no engagement is done? The simple answer is they're going to start behind the start line. Basically, they're going to be down a criteria, and they're going to have to compete in other areas that will make it less likely that they'll be competitive enough to be funded.
And I'll add to Matthew's response. One thing is, I know we shared this at the start of the workshop, but we have since covered a ton of material. So I want to remind everyone that when we evaluate the community engagement criteria, the interagency equity members from the Interagency Equity Advisory Committee are part of that process, and they review the applications, they review the community engagement criteria and the responses provided. And some of the feedback that we received from them during the evaluations and as well at the February Interagency Equity Advisory Committee meeting was the same across the board, which is they are not no one is interested in performative community engagement. It has to be beyond just informing them, or as William Walker quoted it, as it has to be beyond invitations. We have to move beyond that process. So it can't just be performative engagement. There has to be consideration, thoughtful and meaningful engagement, and evaluators will be looking for that in this particular criteria. So as Matthew said, if that is not demonstrated within the narrative and reflected in the appendix that you may or may not share or choose to share as part of your response to this criteria, then you may or may not perform very well on that specific criteria across all program guidelines. Hopefully that answers your question, Michelle. If you do have any follow-ups, please feel free to add it in chat or let us know. I appreciate it. It's a good question. Seeing no questions relevant to this specific site, let's go on to the next slide, Ben. Okay, so here you can see our proposed new addition to Section A. As a reminder, Section A in the Equity Supplement lists example indicators used to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups. The new tool we are proposing to add is the California Department of Transportation's, also known as Caltrans, Transportation Equity Index, also known as EQI for short. The Equity Index is a spatial screening tool that utilizes transportation and socioeconomic indicators to identify transportation-based priority populations at the census block level. The Equity Index is currently being piloted for use in the Caltrans System Investment Strategy, also known as CSIS. Other program-specific use cases for the Equity Index are also under development. Broadly speaking, the Equity Index was developed to identify transportation-based priority populations for applicable funding programs, and to support planning and project-level analysis and identify opportunities to advance equitable outcomes during project planning, development, and design. For more information about the program, you may visit Caltrans's Equity Index webpage that is linked here. This additional resource can be utilized independently or in combination with the other indicators provided in Section A. I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions or feedback. So I see a question from Shelley. I'm going to read it out loud. Would you consider adding the United States Department of Transportation Equitable Transportation Community Explorer, ATP, which is the Active Transportation Program, added this tool to the current cycle? That's a good question, Shelley. Definitely something we can consider. I will add the caveat that I am happy to look into it and see if it is relevant to the SB1 programs, because our programs do differ somewhat from the Active Transportation Program. But if it is a more broader resource similar to Cal EnviroScreen or Caltrans Transportation Equity Index, and some of the other indicators that are used as examples in Section A, we can certainly explore adding that in as a tool or resource that people can leverage as part of their response. Great question, Shelley. Any other comments or questions regarding this particular item? And like I said, this is an additional resource that can be utilized independently or in combination with the other indicators that we provided in Section A. Okay, I see Sona has a question.
Could you please clarify whether the final version of this tool will be announced by the time we have the guidelines released? Because based on the workshop that I participated on March 20th, I don't recall whether they said that it would be finalized in the near future.
I believe.
Sona, that is, yeah,
Oh,
Sona, that's a good question. I may turn it over to either Bridget or Laura Pennybaker from our planning team, who may have, or we could even turn it over to Caltrans, because so just to kind of paint a picture of where we're going to be with the final guidelines, these guidelines for the SB1 program should be adopted in August. And our desire was to hopefully at least include the EQI as a potential tool, but maybe if anyone who might be able to offer more specificity on the Abby, I see, has raised her hand.
That might have been an accidental hand raise.
So Matthew, this is Laura. Can you hear
Oh, go
me?
ahead, Laura.
Sure. So I was just perusing the attendee list because I had noticed that there was some staff from the Office of Equity and Sustainability, but I'm not seeing them on anymore. So why don't we do this? It's our understanding that there's a 1.0 version of the tool that's out right now, with actual use case scenarios associated with the tool, and it's I would say like greater availability at the time that these guidelines would be put into practice. I think we want to check with the Caltrans folks to determine what the answer to that question is. So we are happy to follow up on that, and then maybe Naveen, we could include it in the follow-up email that you send out to folks.
Absolutely, Laura. Thank you for chiming in. I'm not seeing any other responses or comments right now to this particular item. Like I said before, happy to jump back to any previous slide at any point during this workshop, but I am going to go ahead and move forward to the next slide, please. Thank you, Ben. Okay, so here you can see our proposed new addition to Section B. As a reminder, Section B lists example equity benefits that may result from inclusion and engagement strategies such as those provided in Section C of the Equity Supplement. We have, again, made some clarifying edits here as well and added new benefits based on project applications that we received in Cycle 3 and based on feedback we've received directly from all of you. So I want to specifically highlight item 7, especially since this was a critical benefit yielded in a few applications in the last cycle as a direct result of community engagement practices. Plenty of emphasis was placed on ensuring first and last mile connectivity with multimodal options at transportation hubs to accommodate all types of travels in the project, all types of travelers in the project area. So that was really cool, and we wanted to include that as an example equity benefit based on meaningful and thoughtful community engagement. I do have an additional note to add here that 3 benefits that were previously listed here, they were items 4, 6, and 8 in the 2022 Equity Supplement, have since been moved to Section C as they were better suited as strategies that result in some of these key benefits that you see here. I will highlight those for you and for your reference when we get to that section, but I will pause first to see if there are any questions or feedback on this slide in particular. Shelley.
Hi again. I actually have a late comment or question on Section A.
Sure, can you move back a slide, Ben?
It's not on your slide. I was just looking at the draft.
Oh, okay.
And the other definition or identifier has a lot of options to provide like a significant number or population of various considerations. Are we, if we use any of those, should we justify what we think is significant, or do you have like a threshold?
That's a good question. I want to pause for just a second. Ben, do you think you could pull up the full draft of the 2024 supplement? Just so everyone can see what Shelley is talking about. Let's go into full screen. Thank you very much. So go to the next page. Again, next page. Next page. And I think 2 more pages later, I think it's on page 5. Yeah, there it is. Scroll back 1, please. So you'll see that the comment that Shelley is making is about the item at the bottom of page 5 of the 2024 draft SB1 Programs Equity Supplement PDF. So if you look at it, it says other, if an applicant agency cannot utilize the aforementioned indicators that are included in Section A, the agency may submit other documentation to demonstrate that the project benefits a disadvantaged community. So in suggested alternatives, we provided utilizing census data that represents an assessment of the project study area. And we request that the agency provide a quantitative assessment, something like a survey, to demonstrate that the population that's contained within their project study area boundary includes one or more of the items enumerated immediately underneath. So if you move to the next page, Ben. And if you can zoom in to the top part of the page, that would be great, if it's possible. You might have to exit reader view. Yeah. I think you can zoom in a little bit further. And you don't have to go back into full screen mode. That's good. I think we can, if no one can see that, please let me know. We can zoom in further. But there are a few lists here that includes a median household income that is at or below 80% of the state median household income. And then the point that Shelley's specifically pointing to is a significant number of households at risk of displacement, or a significant number of households receiving food stamps or public assistance, etc. So Shelley, essentially you're asking whether we have a threshold for what constitutes significant.
Yes.
I think that's a great question. We added this specification in because previously we just listed all of these factors without really offering any details as to what we meant by these specific factors to be included. So I think it's a good question. We can certainly quantify it further.
Naveen, I'm gonna
Oh, Matthew,
I
go
don't
ahead.
know if you can ever tell if my camera's on or off, or if I'm
I can't see it. Sorry, I see you now.
No, it's fine. And so Shelley, thank you for the question. Actually, Abby with Calsta had asked this question in the chat earlier on, and I think this is a really good question. And so that's the only reason I've had a little bit of an opportunity, I think, to come up with a response, Naveen. That's the only reason I'm going to jump in. So the answer right now is significant is not going to carry a quantitative range. Because it would be very difficult for us, I think, in the time that we're going to try to finalize this, to come up with a range that we would determine to be significant among each of these indicators. So today I'm going to say significant is not necessarily going to be left open to interpretation. On all of these, we will determine if we can come up with a range that equals significant. But just understand that even defining a range that is significant versus, moderate, could be contentious in and of itself. So what you see right now is going to be based on a qualitative understanding of a significant increase or a significant number. And we'll work towards trying to develop a range if that's something that we can do. I just can't guarantee that we'll be able to get there before we finalize these guidelines.
Thanks, Matthew. Hopefully that answers your question, Shelley. Let me know if you have any follow-ups to that. And Abby, I've unmuted you. I can ask you to unmute on both the items that I'm seeing. I'm seeing two names for you. Did you want to unmute yourself and make the comment?
Oh no, sorry. I am like all confused because I can't see the chat, and then it's like yeah, I did not mean to raise my hand, but I did take like stats a very long time ago, and I thought that there is a way to calculate statistical significance without necessarily setting a threshold, and there's kind of like a formula for doing that. But so that might be one way to consider it, is like offering just like that formula, and then people could plug in their data into it. That could be maybe a solution for that. But that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I can't tell if I'm unmuted, so
you are very much unmuted. And then you had added another comment into the question and answer box. I don't know if you wanted to make that comment publicly since you're unmuted now, or did you want me to read it for you?
So I had my first question about that structural and procedural equity strategies, and then I was like very confused about how to use the chat, and I didn't. So that's all in reference to that very early question I asked, which you answered. So thank you.
So I think there might be that issue with the unique link that so Abby I think your other account has Carolyn maybe on it. So Carolyn shared some
Oh,
information.
maybe
Carolyn
it's the,
Abrams.
I forwarded it to Elena Bompieri. She might be listed as me.
Well, I will go ahead and read the comment out loud since she sent
Okay.
it to all of us. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hi, everyone. This is Carolyn Abrams with the Director's Office of Equity, Sustainability, and Tribal Affairs. She does not seem to have access to chat for some reason. So she said she couldn't unmute. So I'm reading this question and response for her. To answer the question about the Caltrans Equity Index, also known as EQI, the tool was publicly launched on March 4th, 2024, and is now available for use. You can access the Caltrans webpage for more details, and I had linked that already in our previous slide, so you can access it from there, or you can just Google Caltrans EQI, and it should bring up the webpage directly.
And Naveen, I just dropped Carolyn's entire comment with the link in the chat that I think well, maybe it said it went to everybody. I don't know that the attendees have access to the chat to actually type in, but I'm hopeful that they can actually read anything that we're sending out to them. So, but this will be added to our list of things to follow up with the group on.
Yeah. And thanks again, Carolyn, for offering that information and clarifying that for all of us. I appreciate it. And I see that there is another hand raised. Elena Bompidi, I'm going to unmute you so you can talk.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm here as a guest today from the California Climate Investments team. We're at the Air Resources Board, but I also support Abigail Jackson over at CalSTA on a draft anti-displacement memo of recommendations for the CAPDI programs. And I wanted to just jump in on this question about significance and offer, one way we tried to navigate this in that effort, which was by promoting this idea that applicants join forces with a CBO or some other local leader organization that can speak to displacement risks or vulnerabilities for populations, communities of concern. And so having their knowledge and wherewithal signed on to a program as a partner could be one way to kind of give confidence to grantors that there is those boots on the ground, local ground truth knowledge. So I just wanted to offer that like partnerships idea and encouraging partnerships that are interdisciplinary and kind of bring in those folks who have knowledge of these particular issues, which can be really hard to quantify and whose thresholds might be very context dependent and so variable across different areas of the state that make state barometers really hard to define. Going the partnerships route was just something I wanted to volunteer that we learned from that effort.
Thank you, Elena. That's a really great comment and actually loops in with some of the strategies that we are suggesting within the equity supplement as well. But it's just, this is a really pertinent comment. So thank you so much for coming on and making it. And we'll definitely consider maybe fleshing that out further in the equity supplement itself as well. And we're back to the presentation. I don't see any hands raised and I don't see any comments or questions in the Q&A. So I am going to move ahead to the next section. Here you can see our proposed revisions and new additions to Section C, which provides example inclusion and engagement strategies. Again, the goal with these revisions is to further clarify intent, which is not to simply inform communities, it is to include and engage them through the life cycle of the project development process. Mindful and meaningful inclusion and engagement are critical to successfully advance equity in transportation planning, as well as project development and delivery. As I noted earlier, there are 3 benefits that were moved from Section B to Section C, and they're included here below as items 8, 9, and 10. Again, based on your feedback, we agreed that these were better suited as strategies that result in some of the key benefits listed in Section B in the last slide. I will pause here to see if there are any questions or feedback at this time. I see Abby has a question. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
This is the real Abby. Yeah, I love this list, and
Oh,
I was wondering how, maybe if there's like a past plan or prior engagement that has been done, like why is that not on this list where you can like reference old planning documents? Was there some intent in not including that on the list?
so Abby, I think you cut out in the middle of your comment. So if you don't mind restating it so I can
Oh.
hear it again, that would be great.
Yes, my apologies. Okay, so great list of items here. What I don't see on the list is something about like referencing existing planning documents that identify needs in them. And was there some intent behind not including that in the list, so as perhaps to solicit more engagement, for example?
Do you have any examples of what existing planning documents you're referring to?
Like, in the like active transportation plan of X city, this neighborhood said they needed more like stop signs or something.
So active transportation, the program is separate from the SB1 programs at the commission slightly. They have a different mandate, if you will, in terms of what they're doing. So we can incorporate some of those items by reference. We cannot specifically reference a specific plan from a specific project or community because these are competitive programs. So we don't want to taint the waters or in any way signify that certain projects are going to be more eligible or less eligible or more competitive or less competitive. We do want applicants to go out and pursue those inclusion and engagement activities in the communities where they're planning to develop those projects because each community's needs are different. So what may work for a community somewhere in Northern California may not work at all for the community in Southern California, despite having similar demographics or similar health concerns or issues. Or development issues, you know, so it just really depends, and each group of communities, each set of communities are unique that way. So that's why we opted to provide examples of strategies that have been successful based on past applicants and information they've shared with us without trying to maybe pigeonhole ourselves too much into very specific requirements, like you can build this, this, and this, and that will be great. Because I think whenever you limit, you kind of tend to not have that creativity and those unique solutions that a lot of our project applicants have been able to develop in the past cycles and present, which is why we have those examples in the first place. So hopefully that responds to your question a little bit, Abby. Certainly
Yeah.
we can incorporate more broadly by reference. It's something I can explore, take back to my executive team and see if we can maybe workshop that a little bit further and see what we can include though.
I mean, it wasn't a comment that you should include it. I was just more curious behind the reasoning, and I think that your explanation was helped me understand better. And yeah,
Naveen,
I don't disagree with it.
I'm gonna add one element to this. I think because Abby, if I hear what you're saying, we understand that a lot of these projects have undergone you know, the environmental planning phase, and then if it's an ATP project, it'll have had a degree or a length of active transportation planning involvement. I think the main reason we're not really calling out past or prior engagement here is because we're looking for like currency, right? We want something that's a bit more current and updated to when the project is being submitted, implying that, you know, if this project was popular or was popular is probably not the best way to say it, was supported by the community back when that planning document or that planning effort was taken on. If that effort was taken on 5 years ago, we also want to make sure that that it still has a relevance and a support when the project is being provided to us today. So I would, because this is from last cycle, the framework for this, we were trying to encourage that, you know, we want to take advantage of the engagement that has already occurred, but we want to make sure that that's still relevant when we're evaluating these projects. Yeah, I think Bridget's comment on the CMCPs is a perfect characteristic. You know, if you feel like the work and the engagement that has been done in the past is meets the intent of this list that you see before you, then we would consider it sufficient. But again, with that, the nature of it being relatively recent.
That's helpful. Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Any other questions or comments on this specific slide? Or any slides previous to this one? I don't see any raised hands or comments. So Ben, I think we can advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. On this and the following slides, not on the following slides, sorry. On this slide, I have compiled some of the most frequently asked questions that we have received. I can read these aloud for reference purposes, and I'm also happy to respond to any questions that may arise leading off of them as well. So, can applicants consult commission staff or advocates in the development of their community engagement plans? Yes. In fact, we encourage you to contact advocates and leaders in the communities where you plan to develop the proposed project to receive specific and more effective feedback for your community engagement plan. What if an agency does not know which community-based organizations or leaders to contact? If you are unsure of where to start, you may contact commission staff, that is us, who will consult members of the Interagency Equity Advisory Committee and advocacy organizations and experts with whom we liaise to provide some recommendations or make connections when possible. That is the whole point of why we are here today, and we would like to be able to offer any assistance that we can. I see a couple of questions. Give me just one sec, and I will ask you to unmute yourself. Elena, I think you're able to do that now, so go ahead and unmute yourself to make your comment, please.
So much. I just wanted to dovetail what I see on this slide and that second question with the previous slide and the comments we heard about plans that Abby mentioned, linking, projects or showing alignment with previously established plans. And I just want to reinforce why I feel we should continue to include that. And that's not to say we shouldn't also include, new and fresh community engagement, but sometimes these, entities that maybe are planning these projects don't have those deep networks. And so it can be really effortful and maybe even incomplete, for them to do their own community engagement. They might not, reach out into, all the contours of a community whose perspectives might be really valuable. And so I think it is important to link to those, established planning documents that maybe are, locally led or local CBO led, that, were established with the, networks and relationships that those entities have. Because I think that can be really valuable for situations like whoever or whatever asked the second question, not knowing who or what to contact. So just another comment in support of having linkages to previously established plans. Thanks.
So I think maybe at this point I'm a little confused. So Elena, maybe you can chime in and explain it a little bit further to me, educate me a little bit. Is these existing plans at the local level, you're suggesting that that applicants interested in applying for funds in the SB1 programs, we should be able to link them to those existing plans at the commission? Or do you think that the applicant agencies should reach out to those community-based organizations or local entities or agencies to see if a community engagement plan already exists on the books? I just want to clarify which one it is.
Yeah, more the second, if I understand you correctly. And maybe one thing that could help my illustration is referring to a project or a program that I have in mind behind my comment, which is the Transformative Climate Communities program that's administered by the Strategic Growth Council. And in the guidelines, they state that in the application process, applicants should articulate how their project is in alignment with existing plans. And they kind of provide a menu of various types of planning documents that could be, relevant. And not all are going to be relevant, but I mean, not just community engagement plans, but some communities might have anti-displacement plans or housing plans where a transportation project, might be relevant, or environmental justice plans, things like that. So having kind of like an open menu of plans just to show that like the people who are conceptualizing the project are building it in alignment with already established, community identified needs is what I'm getting at.
That makes a lot of sense, and something that we can definitely consider. I'm not sure if it would be something that we could rope in for cycle 4 guidelines, but certainly something that we can try to consider as we move forward with future guidelines as well. That's a really poignant comment. I will say, Ben, I'm so sorry to do this to you, but do you think you could go back to the full 2024 SB1? Yes, this one. And if you can scroll up from this page to maybe just under the second page. Keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. Right there. Scroll back down, sorry. A little bit more, a little bit more. A little bit more, sorry, Ben. Just right there. You'll see at the bottom of your page, we say to learn more about racial equity best practices. Oh, next page. Can you scroll back down, Ben? Yes. Thank you. A little bit more. There we go. So at the bottom of the page here, you'll see that we have a little addition here, and it says to learn more about racial equity best practices, visit the California Strategic Growth Council's Racial Equity Resource Hub. Key focus hubs to consider: creating your roadmap, growing awareness, and taking action. So this, I would say, is kind of like a preliminary launch pad to what you were suggesting, Elena. And that's why I think it might be a good item to consider for future programming cycles as well, is maybe figuring out a way to incorporate some of those plans by reference, or at least just put in a note in that, hey, consider looking for those plans if they're out there when you're developing your project. This particular racial equity resource hub is a great starting point for a lot of our stakeholders who've mentioned that maybe they don't have the resources to inquire or acquire said information, or they don't understand racial equity best practices, or they need to convince people in their project teams or their boards or commissions or whatever about why they need to pursue these initiatives. And this is a really great starting point. I believe the Strategic Growth Council established this hub in response to the governor's, and I'm now spacing on what they're called, the governor's order to establish this particular type of hub. And they do feature all of the different types of plans and tactics in starting from like the very introductory point of what racial equity is and why it's beneficial, to all the different state agencies and plans that are out there for people to be able to maybe leverage for their own purposes or repurpose or incorporate into their process in some manner. So I think what you're saying kind of falls in line with that. And hopefully this is a good starting point for us to launch from. I really appreciate your comment. Thank you so much for sharing it. I see another comment. Thanks, Ben. We can go back to the presentation. I see another comment here from Hannah. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud. Echoing Elena and Abigail's comments about the ability to refer to past community engagement plans, I do think this is important. I think that applicants should be allowed to refer to past engagement needs as long as they are somewhat recent. I wouldn't want to unintentionally disincentivize or disadvantage under-resourced applicants who have not been able to resource community engagement activities year after year. Also, there is often community engagement fatigue, and therefore I think it makes sense to be able to tap into previous engagement data as long as there are guardrails around the facts that they are recent, etc. Thank you for your comment, Hannah.
Naveen, I think there's one thing I want to add, based on, I think, because now I'm seeing another question from Shelley on on a comment that Bridget made, and I think it adds a little bit of context here. So I think from us not citing that prior engagement being considered here is not necessarily to say it would be disregarded or not considered at all. I think the intention behind us providing this list of what to do is if you've done planning in the past and you've done engagement in the past, and that, you know, aligns to what you're seeing in our supplement, and you can, you know, demonstrate how, even if it is a little bit older, maybe it's not as recent as the last 12 months or 24 months, that's entirely sufficient. We would just need that explanation provided, right? We wouldn't be saying that that old engagement is no longer relevant. But we just, and Bridget's comment is very specific to Naveen's program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, where we have a checklist for what we consider an acceptable comprehensive multimodal corridor plan. And our requirement is not that applicants provide a whole new comprehensive multimodal corridor planning process and document every cycle. If you've undergone a process that aligns to this checklist and can demonstrate that it still satisfies our requirement. And so I think hopefully that kind of combines the two conversations. And I appreciate Hannah and Abby and Elena, you know, reflecting on, you know, a desire to have, we do not want to exacerbate engagement and fatigue. We know that a lot of the members of these communities that participate and provide input do not want to be repeatedly asked to provide that same input because it invalidates or it can be perceived as invalidating input that they've provided in the past. So I think it's really, this was a starting point for us to say and demonstrate what we think positive, effective community engagement looks like. And if you've already performed this level of engagement with your community-based organizations or at the local or regional level, please demonstrate and explain to us how it meets what we're asking for here in this supplement. So hopefully, Naveen, sorry to interject. I see a lot of, like, this is a very important area that I'm sure if we don't kind of flesh it out right now, we might be getting questions from our potential applicants to say, well, if we've invested all this time and money in the past, are you saying you won't consider it? No, that's absolutely not what we're saying. Sorry, Naveen, I'll turn it back over to you.
No apologies needed, Matthew. I think that's that was a really great way to bridge the gap between those two comments and the questions. I hopefully that made sense to folks, and let me know if you have any follow-up questions. I do want to add one note for all of the potential applicants who are on the call right now. This is something I mentioned in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program workshop in March. God, we're at the end of March now already. So just at the start of March, when we had our second individual program workshop, I did mention a note that evaluators made in my program, and I think it may broadly apply to all of the SB1 programs, is that when you are conducting that community engagement and you're responding to the criteria in your narrative, please make sure that you are there was community engagement conducted for the project for which you were competing funds for in our program. So if you did a broad scale community engagement in a larger corridor or in a neighborhood, and you're in SCCP, a lot of times what happens is that we have a parent project and then we have several child projects underneath it. And sometimes applicants tend to talk about just the parent project and community engagement conducted for it, but don't really highlight each of the separate components and what they did to solicit feedback for certain other components in that larger project. So make sure you respond to the criteria based on all the different projects that you are trying to highlight. You can do that narratively, like holistically within your narrative, or you can do that bulleted out by each project or each segment. That's really up to you and what you would prefer, but just note that that is something that we heard back from evaluators last time, that there were more broader community engagement plans cited as in response to the criteria, and what we need is community engagement specific for that project, not the larger corridor. Hopefully that responds to your question. Okay, so the last FAQ that we had listed on here that I want to mention is, do applicants have to use every indicator or demonstrate all benefits provided in the equity supplement? No. The equity supplement provides important information on the indicators that can be used to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups, equity benefits, community engagement strategies, and anti-displacement resources. However, this is all intended to guide applicants to provide more detailed information about the project's benefits and impacts to the disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. Applicants are not limited to the indicators, the benefits, or the strategies that are provided within the equity supplement, though we do strongly encourage utilizing them if you have nowhere else to go or don't have any strategies that you are already utilizing that you prefer to use. I do see that there is another comment from Abigail Jackson. I will read it out loud really quick. I think Matthew addressed this a little bit, that some people couldn't read Bridget's comments, so he spoke to that, and so I think we're covered. But yes, currency of engagement is good. Abigail also sees how some things like climate adaptation plans probably don't change much rapidly, and that she liked the solutions that Matthew has suggested, leaving some room for justification and some explanation. And she said she appreciates that we spent some time addressing this. Thank you, Abby. I want to pause here really quick and see if anybody has any questions stemming from the FAQs that are listed here, or any further discussions or anything like that. If not, I think, Ben, we can move on to the next slide. Great, thank you so much. So we will email the save the date for the next round of individual SB1 program workshops soon, so please keep an eye out for that announcement. As you can see here, we do plan to present red line draft guidelines for each program and solicit stakeholder feedback on those red line draft guidelines. And we will also address any final changes before presenting draft guidelines to Commission in June 2024. So I'm going to pause to see. I think Sona has a raised hand here. Oh, sorry, Sona. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, my apologies. So similar to today's workshop where you presented the redlined guidelines for the equity supplement, would you mind providing those edits in advance of the workshop so that we have time to look through and carefully to provide better
Sona, I don't know if you got cut off there.
Or are you planning to provide those during the... Oh, I'm so sorry. I was asking whether you can provide those red line draft guidelines in advance of the workshop, individual workshops for SB1 programs, so that we have better chance to read them and better engage during the workshop.
Thanks, Sona, for that comment. So typically, at least for my program, we try to provide the marked up edits around the time that we're doing our workshop and not before that, because then what we have is a barrage of emails coming at us about all the things that we plan to talk to you about during the workshop, so we can explain our intentions behind the changes as we've done here today, that you can hear from us directly about our intent behind those changes, the purpose behind those changes, and have some preliminary discussion here in a group setting. And then we will follow up with you with either a second workshop after you've had a chance to review these in greater detail, or if there are not many substantive comments received, we'll factor in all of the comments we might receive in emails after the workshop and factor those into the final document that we put together, final draft document that we put together to then share with the executive team and then present it to the commission thereafter. So typically the reason why at least I prefer to hold on to it until the day of the workshop is so that I have a chance to help you understand what I'm proposing to change, why I'm proposing to change it, so you can understand it and ask questions about the process itself. And then you can take as much time as you need with the guidelines themselves and follow up at a later date or at our next workshop. Hopefully that answers your question, Sona. And any other questions or comments about the workshop specifically, or any of the slides that we've shared thus far? I do want to take a moment and say thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughtful feedback and your comments. This was the goal of the workshops. I'm really happy that folks chimed in and shared their thoughts. Really appreciate that. Seeing no comments or questions. Oh, wait, hold on. I might have one. Sona, yes, thank you. Glad that I was able to answer your question. Okay, so seeing no other questions or comments, I think we can move on to the next slide, Ben. Awesome. So you may have seen our announcement in your inboxes about this for the last few months, but if you haven't, we are yet again happy to share that SB1 program's virtual office hours have returned in full force as of March. We began meeting with applicants earlier this month and are still scheduling office hours for April and May. Ben, who you can't see here, who has been diligently advancing our slides and is the most awesome teammate ever, is actually the one leading this effort and pulling out all of your appointments, looking through all of our calendars and arranging those invitations so we can get as many of you in for virtual sessions as possible. So if you have not requested a session yet, please do so at your earliest convenience. I know Ben would really appreciate it. And sessions are reserved on a first come, first served basis, and they do tend to fill up pretty quickly. Like March and April are completely full. So we would like to accommodate as many interested applicants and participants as possible. Please do understand that participating in these office hours sessions does not guarantee that a proposed project will be recommended for funding. I have embedded a link here to the request form directly onto this slide, but it is also available on all of the program web pages. And as a reminder, these sessions do conclude in May. So if you have not signed up already, I strongly encourage you to sign up for a session, even if it's just like a nice little 30 minutes to ask us basic questions about incorporating those guidelines or responding to project concerns or something like that. Anything you want, we will sit there and talk about it together. Any questions about virtual office hours? Okay. I see no comments and I see no raised hands. So Ben, I think we can move on to the next slide, please. All right, so we have a little bit of time left. This was scheduled to go until 4. It is currently only 2:52, but I did want to say that we've covered a lot of information today, a lot of materials. So I do want to pause and see if there are any reflections, questions, comments, or concerns that you want to share at this time. I do want to remind you that there was a poll that I initiated. I see that a few of you have responded. Maybe if you weren't here when I launched it or weren't paying attention, maybe go look at the poll and factor in your comments. Really would appreciate hearing from you. If you would like to share your comment live, please raise your hand or put a question or a comment in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to read it aloud for you or respond to it over text. I'm going to pause here for a couple of minutes. Oh, I was muted. So I'm seeing folks starting to drop off the call. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated it. And we're hoping that we can stay in touch with you. And so, like I said, we covered a lot of information today. Thank you so much for listening and engaging with us directly. As always, your partnership and your feedback is a valuable part of this process, and we couldn't do these workshops and these guidelines without you. I do want to move on to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. So our contact information is provided here, and it's also available on the Commission's website. I have also embedded links that redirect to the SB1 programs and the respective individual program web pages for your convenience. You can contact us anytime with any questions or comments. We are here to help you as best as we can. And to the last slide, Ben. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us today. These workshops, like I said, are only as effective as the people who participate in them, and you are, as always, an exceptional group. I hope everyone enjoys a restful weekend, and I'm gonna wait here for maybe another minute and see if anybody has any questions or comments. If you don't, feel free to log off. We'll see you at the next one. Yes, Belinda, the slides will be sent out. The presentation, the materials, the corresponding attachments, the information about the accountability and transparency guidelines, as well as the Caltrans EQI tool will all be sent out in one email. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the webinar since there's only a few people left and I see no questions or comments. Thanks, everyone.